Vivid verses.
I used to think the quiet ones were the easiest to manage. You just had to know which lever to pull and pull it slow enough that they didn't notice the machine working. I'd met him at a friend's dinner party 7 months back. The kind of gathering where everyone brings wine they think is more impressive than it is and stands around a kitchen island pretending the conversation isn't a performance. He hadn't performed. He'd leaned against the counter with a glass of water, not wine, and listened more than he talked. And when he did talk, people went quiet to hear it. I noticed that. I noticed things like that. By the third date, I had a working theory of him. Stable, attentive, unflappable. The kind of man who would absorb a lot before he pushed back, if he pushed back at all. I'd dated men like that before, or men I'd mistaken for that, and I knew the architecture. You give enough to keep them building, and you control the pace of construction. You don't say no. You say not yet, and I just need to feel safe first, and I've been hurt before, and you watch them work harder to earn something you have no real intention of handing over on a fixed schedule. The uncertainty is the product. The waiting is what keeps them invested, because men like him don't walk away from things they haven't finished trying to solve. That was the theory, anyway. We were 6 months in, and I still hadn't let him all the way in, not just physically, though that was the most obvious lever, but the rest of it too. I hadn't given him a key. I hadn't introduced him to my mother. I kept a careful, deliberate gap between what he gave me and what I gave back, and I told myself this was prudence, self-protection, a woman who'd learned the hard way not to hand over too much too fast. It was a Thursday night, his place, the two of us on his back patio with the kind of low outdoor lighting that makes everyone look more relaxed than they are. He made dinner. Something with lemon and rosemary that I complimented twice because I genuinely meant it the first time and wanted to seem genuine the second. He sat across the little iron table from me, sleeves rolled, watching me with that particular stillness he had, like he was reading something just behind my face. "You've been distant this week," he said. Not an accusation, just a fact laid on the table next to the breadbasket. "Have I?" I said. "I didn't mean to be." "You did a little. That's fine. I'm just naming it." I felt the small flare of annoyance I always felt when he named things instead of reacting to them. Most men, if you pulled back, either chased or sulked, and both were useful. Chasing meant leverage. Sulking meant guilt I could resolve on my terms. He didn't do either. He just observed, out loud, like a man reading a weather report. "I've had a lot on my mind," I said. "Work. My sister. I don't know. I think I just need some space to feel sure about things before I let the sentence trail, which was its own kind of sentence. The unfinished thought was supposed to imply something large and tender underneath it, something he should want to coax out gently, patiently, on my schedule. He nodded slowly, cutting into his chicken. "Sure about what, specifically?" "Us. This. I don't know yet. I'm working on it." "Okay," he said, and ate. That was it. No protest. No what do you mean, you don't know. No wounded silence. Just okay, delivered with the same even tone he used for everything, and then the scrape of his fork against the plate. I should have heard that okay for what it was. I didn't. I heard a man being patient, and patience in my arithmetic was compliance waiting to mature. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing, because he never once made it visible, was that he was already doing math. He'd clocked the pattern weeks earlier. Somewhere around the fourth time, I'd pulled back right after he'd shown up for something that mattered to me. A bad day at work, a fight with my sister, a flat tire at midnight that he drove 40 minutes to fix without being asked twice. Every time he closed a gap, I opened a different one. He noticed that the withdrawals weren't random. They came right after he'd proven, again, that he could be counted on, as if proving it were the trigger, not the cure. He didn't say any of this to me. He turned it over privately, the way he turned over everything, methodically, without heat. She's not pulling back because she's scared. She's pulling back because it works. Every time I show I'm reliable, she tightens the leash a notch to see if I'll still be standing there when she loosens it again. This isn't fear. This is a system, and I'm being run through it. He didn't resent the system. Exactly. He found it almost interesting, in the way you find opponent's strategy interesting right up until you decide you're done playing against it. He didn't need to be cruel about the conclusion. He just needed to be accurate. He had, and I genuinely did not know this until much later, no shortage of other options. A coworker who'd asked him to get a drink twice and taken his polite deferrals with grace instead of wounded pride. An ex who still texted him on his birthday. No agenda, just warmth. A woman from his gym who told a mutual friend, half joking, that he was criminally underutilized. None of this was a backup plan in the cynical sense. He wasn't keeping a roster. He simply wasn't a man operating from scarcity, and that distinction mattered more than I understood. A man who believes he has no options will tolerate almost anything to keep the one option he has. A man who knows he has options evaluates. He weighs, and when the weighing is done, he acts, because waiting past the point of clarity isn't patience anymore. It's just inertia, and he didn't deal in inertia. He also had, separate from any of that, a financial life that didn't need rescuing or merging or rushing. He wasn't hunting for someone to build a future with because he was afraid of building one alone. That mattered too, though I didn't think to ask about it because I'd already decided what role he played in my life. The steady one, the safety net, the man you keep close enough to lean on and far enough to never fully choose. I had built him a part to play. I just hadn't told him he was cast. 2 weeks after the patio dinner, my sister's situation blew up. A custody scare with her ex that turned out to be mostly bluster, but didn't feel like bluster at 2 in the morning when she called me crying. I called him without thinking, the way you call the person who fixes things. And he was in my apartment in 20 minutes with coffee and a legal pad because that was who he was when it counted, methodical and calm in exactly the moments most people fall apart. We sat at my kitchen table while I talked my sister down on speakerphone, and he wrote a list, 3 concrete questions she should ask her lawyer in the morning, framed so plainly that her crying slowed and then stopped while she copied them down. After he hung up, I looked at him across the table, a little stunned like I always was when he did something like that without making it about him. I don't know what I'd have done, I said. You'd have figured it out, he said. I just shortened the time. I reached over and put my hand on his, and something in me, something real, not strategic, wanted to stay there all night, wanted to close every gap I'd built between us. But the habit was stronger than the impulse. I pulled my hand back after a few seconds, softened it with a smile, said something about needing sleep, and watched him absorb the small retraction without comment, the same way he absorbed everything. He drove home that night, turning a fresh data point over his mind. She uses me when the structure of her life needs propping up, and retreats the moment the emergency's resolved and intimacy would cost her something instead of saving her something. That's not inconsistency. That's consistency I haven't wanted to name. He didn't decide anything that night. He told himself, later, that he wasn't a man who decided things in the heat of an emotional data point. Heat distorted sample size. He wanted one more test. Not a trap. Not a manipulation of his own. He didn't traffic in those. Just a clean, simple offer, made once, stated plainly, the kind of offer that would tell him everything by how it was received. The test came the following weekend. In the form of a question, he asked me over coffee at my place, both of us still in the unhurried fog of a Saturday morning. I want to take a weekend trip next month, he said. Just the 2 of us. I already looked at flights. He named a few dates, watching me with that same unbothered attentiveness. A small alarm went off in me. Not because I didn't want to go, but because a weekend trip meant proximity with no exit, full days with no engineered distance, Nights where withholding would have to be active and visible instead of just a vague mood I could attribute to stress. The trip threatened the architecture. Maybe, I said. Let me see how work shapes up. I don't want to commit and then have to cancel on you. That's fine, he said. I'll hold the dates for a week. After that, I'll book it as a solo trip or not at all. No pressure either way. I smiled at that because it sounded on the surface like patience. He's giving me room. Why didn't clock was the shape of it? A real deadline, stated once, without drama, with a real alternative already named. Not an ultimatum shouted across a room. A line item on a list, delivered the way he delivered everything, calm and final. A week passed. I didn't bring it up again, partly because I was busy, mostly because some old reflex in me equated silence with control. If I didn't confirm, I kept the leverage. If he asked twice, he'd be proving again how much he wanted it, and proving was always, in my arithmetic, worth more than committing. He didn't ask twice. On the 8th day, he texted, brief and warm, no edge in it at all. Booked the trip solo. Go and clear my head for a few days. Talk when I'm back. I remember staring at that message longer than its length warranted, feeling something shift that I couldn't yet name. A small cold draft moving through a room I'd thought was sealed. I told myself it was fine. Healthy, even a man with his own life, going to do his own thing, not orbiting me entirely. I told myself this was actually good, was actually what I wanted, a man who didn't need me every second. What I didn't let myself examine was the particular quality of his calm. It wasn't the calm of a man giving me room to come around. It was the calm of a man who had already finished a calculation and was simply waiting for the data to catch up to the people involved. He came back from the trip lighter, somehow, though he didn't talk about it much. A few photos of a coastline I didn't recognize, a story about a local who'd given him bad directions on purpose as some kind of regional prank, nothing that read as wounded or performative. He didn't punish me with the trip. He didn't bring it up as a withheld grievance. That, more than anything, should have told me something. A man keeping score brings the scorecard up eventually, usually when he wants something from the guilt. He never did. Whatever he'd settled on the coastline, he'd settled privately, and he came back to me exactly as even-tempered as he'd left. We kept seeing each other through the following weeks, and on the surface very little changed. He still showed up. He still cooked, still fixed things, still listened with that unsettling attentiveness, like he was reading a book he found genuinely interesting and was in no hurry to finish. What had changed, what I only understood much later, piecing it backward, was that he'd stopped angling for anything. There's a particular energy in a person who's still trying to close a gap, a kind of low-grade, hopeful effort that hums underneath ordinary affection. It had been there in him for months, faint but present, and somewhere around that coastline it went quiet. He was kind to me with the kindness of a man who liked me and had simply removed the stake. He wasn't performing patience anymore because he wasn't waiting on an outcome anymore. He'd already arrived at one. I felt the absence of that hum before I could name it. It showed up as a small, persistent unease, the sense that something I'd been counting on, his quiet, steady wanting, had been rerouted somewhere I couldn't see and was now running on a track that no longer passed through me as its destination, only as a stop along the way. So I did what I'd always done when the architecture wobbled. I leaned in. I gave a little more, the way you feed a fire that started to die down. Not because the fire matters more now, but because you need it to keep burning so the house stays warm on your terms. I started texting him good morning again, something I'd let lapse weeks earlier. I asked him to stay over twice in 1 week instead of the usual once every 10 days rhythm. I let things go further physically than I had in a long while, told myself it was generosity, when really it was recalibration, a course correction calculated to the degree, designed to restabilize a man I'd started, for the first time, to suspect I might actually lose. He noticed the recalibration the way he noticed everything, immediately and without comment. Interesting, he thought, lying beside me one of those nights, staring at the ceiling while I slept with my hand on his chest like something newly possessive. The supply increases the moment the demand shows signs of leaving instead of escalating. That's not affection finding its way out. That's inventory management. He didn't say this to me. He never once, in the entire arc of it, raised his voice, called me manipulative, demanded an explanation, or asked me to account for the gap between what I gave when I felt secure in keeping him and what I gave when I sensed I might not. He simply absorbed the new data, filed it next to the old data, and let the pattern complete itself in his own time, the way he let everything complete itself, without forcing the shape, just watching it become visible. The end, when it came, didn't come from fight. There was no shouted accusation, no scene, nothing I could point to afterward and say that's where it broke. It came from a Sunday afternoon at a coffee shop near my apartment, the kind of unremarkable setting that made what happened feel almost absurdly small for its weight. We were sitting at a little table by the window, my latte going lukewarm, him with black coffee he never seemed to actually drink, just held. I've been talking about an upcoming family thing. My cousin's engagement party, low-key, immediate family only, and I heard myself say, almost reflexively, I haven't decided if I'm bringing anyone yet. It wasn't even a calculated line in the moment. It was just the old reflex firing on autopilot, the habitual hedge, the perpetual not yet I'd been running for 7 months, except this time it landed in a silence that felt different from all the silences before it. He set his coffee down, unhurried, and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as gentle and entirely unmoved at the same time. "Can I ask you something direct?" he said. "Of course. What's the actual plan here? Not the version where you tell me you need time. The real one." I felt my pulse pick up, the particular alarm of a system being interrogated instead of indulged. "What do you mean? There's no plan." "I'm not. This isn't a strategy. I just need—" "I think it is a strategy," he said, still without any heat in his voice, like he was working through a math problem out loud, and I happened to be the chalkboard. "I think you've been keeping things, mostly, but other things too, at a distance you control, and the distance gets shorter exactly when you're worried I might walk, and longer exactly when you feel sure I won't. I think the closeness isn't a feeling for you right now. It's a setting you adjust." I opened my mouth to deny it and found, to my own surprise, that the denial didn't arrive fully formed. Some part of me had been waiting 7 months for someone to say it out loud, even as another part scrambled to bury it the second it surfaced. "That's not fair," I managed. "I've been honest about needing time." "You have," he agreed. "I'm not saying you lied. I'm saying I understand what the time is for now. And I think you've been hoping I wouldn't, because the whole thing only works if I keep believing it's about fear instead of leverage." The word landed harder than I expected, precise and unkind in its accuracy, though his tone never once turned cruel. He wasn't attacking me. He was simply naming the mechanism, the way he named everything plainly, without flourish, and the plainness was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. "So what? You think I've been manipulating you?" I said, and heard my own voice rise, the first real crack in it. "I think you found something that worked on men before me, and you ran it on me without checking whether it would work the same way," he said. "It didn't. Not because I'm special. Because I don't need what you're offering badly enough to keep paying for it on your terms. I have a life that doesn't require you to complete it. I'm not scared of being alone, so I was never going to be scared into compliance. I think that's the part you didn't calculate." I sat there feeling something crumble that I'd built very carefully, brick by brick, over months. Not just the relationship, but the entire premise underneath it. The assumption that scarcity makes a man pliant, that the ones who don't beg are just better at hiding how badly they want to. I never once considered that some men simply don't operate from one at all in the desperate sense. That there was a category of person for whom I could have this or I could not, and either is survivable was simply true all the way down, and that truth made them immovable in exactly the spot where I'd expected leverage to work. So that's it, I said. You're just done? Because I needed time to feel sure. I'm not angry, he said, and I believed him, which somehow made it land harder than anger would have. I don't think you're a bad person. I think you found a pattern that kept you safe once, and you've been running it on autopilot. And I don't think you've fully admitted to yourself that it's a pattern at all. But I'm not interested in waiting around to be granted access to something I should have just been given, or not, a long time ago. That's not a punishment. It's just true. I don't beg for things. I never have. If I want something and I can't have it honestly, I don't stay in the room negotiating for it. I leave the room. You make it sound so simple, I said, my voice thinner now, less certain. Like people don't have reasons for being careful. They do, he said. I'm not asking you to not have reasons. I'm telling you I've spent enough time figuring out what your carefulness actually costs me, and I've decided I'd rather spend that time somewhere it isn't a cost. He paused, and for the first time something almost soft moved across his face. Not pity exactly, something closer to genuine regret that had nothing to do with hesitation. I liked you. I want to be clear about that, because I think you'll convince yourself later that I didn't, that this was some calculated exit, and you were just collateral. I like you a lot, actually. That's partly why I waited as long as I did to say any of this instead of just disappearing, which would have been easier. But liking someone was never going to be enough to keep me in a structure where affection is a lever instead of feeling. I'm not built to stay in rooms like that. I never have been. So you've just decided. Already. Sitting here. No, he said. I decided a while ago. I just didn't see the point in saying it until you said something that made the decision impossible to keep being polite about. He nodded faintly toward my earlier comment about the engagement party. The careless I haven't decided if I'm bringing anyone yet. The small habitual hedge that had, without either of us quite intending it, become the final exhibit. That was it. Not because it was so terrible, because it was so ordinary. 7 months in, and you still don't know if you'll bring me to a family thing. That's not carefulness anymore. That's an answer. I just hadn't let myself hear it as one until just now. I sat with that, the coffee shop noise going on obliviously around us, someone's espresso machine hissing, two strangers laughing too loudly at the next table over something that had nothing to do with the small devastation happening at ours. I wanted to argue further, wanted to find the crack in his logic that would let me reassert the old order, the gentle leash, the careful distance that had always, until this exact conversation, kept him circling closer instead of walking away. I genuinely cannot find it. Not because he'd out-argue me in some debate club sense, but because he'd simply described what had actually been happening with a clarity I hadn't allowed myself. And once it was said plainly, in daylight, over lukewarm coffee, I had no honest counter to offer. What happens now? I asked, and even as I said it, I heard the old reflex in it, the question that assumed there was still a negotiation to be had, a next move for me to calculate, a way to adjust the terms and bring him back into range. Now I finished my coffee, he said, with something that was almost a smile, though not unkind, and then I'm going to go. Not dramatically. I'm not going to block you, or make a scene, or send you a long text tonight, explaining myself further. I've said what I think is true. I don't have anything else productive to add to it. I'm not going to sit across from you negotiating for something that shouldn't require negotiation in the first place. That's not how I want to get anything, ever, from anyone. If it's not given freely, I don't want it managed into existence. You make it sound like I made you beg, I said, defensive again, the old reflex surfacing one more time. You never begged for anything. You were always so calm about everything. I thought that meant you were fine. I was calm because I don't beg, he said simply. Calm isn't the same as fine. I just don't believe pleading changes outcomes with people who've already decided how something's going to go. I'd rather use the time to figure out my own next move than spend it trying to talk someone into feeling something they've told me, in every way except words, that they're not ready to feel. You were never cruel to me. I want to be fair about that too. But you were withholding on a schedule, and I think some part of you needed me to keep guessing at the schedule instead of just asking you to drop it, because the guessing is what kept me invested. I stopped needing to guess a while ago. I think I just needed today to say it out loud instead of just acting on it quietly the way I'd already started to. He finished the coffee he'd barely touched in one even motion, more symbolic than thirsty, and stood, unhurried, the same way he did everything. He didn't lean down to kiss my cheek or offer some softened, ambiguous goodbye that would leave a door cracked open for me to wander back through whenever I decided I was finally ready to grant him the access he'd apparently been waiting on. He just looked at me, steady, not unkind, and said, "Take care of yourself," in a tone that closed the sentence the way a door closes when someone isn't slamming it, just shutting it firmly because the conversation on the other side of it is genuinely finished. And then he left, not theatrically, not with one last look over his shoulder that I could spend the next week reinterpreting for hidden hope. He paid at the counter, said something brief and pleasant to the barista, and walked out into the ordinary Sunday light like a man with somewhere else entirely to be, which, it turned out, he did. I sat at that little table for a long time after, my latte fully cold now, replaying the conversation in pieces, looking for the part where I could have answered differently in a moment and changed the ending, the way you replay a hand of cards looking for the move that would have saved you, refusing for a while to accept that the hand had been lost several rounds earlier, quietly, while I was still busy admiring my own strategy. I called him twice over the following 2 weeks. Not to plead. I told myself that, anyway, that I wasn't pleading, I was just clarifying, but the calls had the unmistakable shape of someone trying to reopen a negotiation that the other party had already closed with the finality of a man checking a box. He answered both times, polite, unbothered, his voice carrying no trace of bitterness or triumph, which somehow made it harder to bear than either would have. He told me, gently and without repeating himself more than once, that he didn't think going back over it would change anything, that he wasn't angry with me, that he hoped things went well for me, and that he didn't think it would help either of us to keep having this particular conversation on a loop. I heard later, through the kind of mutual acquaintance who always seems to know things, that he was seeing someone, not seriously yet, early days, but someone who, from what I could gather, had said yes to dinner the first time he asked instead of making him wait to see if she'd allow it. I felt something sharp and humiliating move through me when I heard that, a feeling I recognized with great reluctance as the exact thing I had spent 7 months trying to manufacture in him and had never once, until that moment, actually felt myself. The particular ache of watching someone you'd assumed would always be available to negotiate with simply stop being available at all, on terms you had no part in setting. I think, if I'm honest, in the specific and unglamorous way he always seemed to manage without effort, that I had mistaken his calm for need. I had built an entire architecture on the assumption that a man who didn't perform desperation was simply better at concealing it, that everyone underneath was scared of losing what little security they had, and that my job was to locate the fear and apply gentle, sustained pressure to it. I had never once seriously entertained the possibility that some men aren't operating from fear at all, that they've simply done the arithmetic on their own worth early and settled it, privately, long before they ever sat down across from someone like me, and that no amount of careful rationing on my part could ever produce scarcity in a man who had already decided, independent of me entirely, that he was not short on options, was not short on time, and was not, under any circumstances, going to spend either one waiting to be granted something that should have been given to him freely or not given at all. He had simply waited the way he weighed everything, with that same unbothered, unhurried precision. And when the number came back clear, he hadn't argued with it, hadn't tried to negotiate it upward through sheer persistence the way I'd assumed he would. He had just stood up, paid for his coffee, and gone to spend what he had, his time, his attention, the particular steadiness that I'd spent months trying to harness instead of simply receiving, on someone who never once made him ask for it twice.
Thanks for listening.